They said it was impossible. They said the market crash was just bad luck. But in a dimly lit diner in downtown Chicago, a billionaire was about to lose everything until a waitress dropped a coffee pot and a truth bomb that changed history. She didn't have a degree on her wall. She had a formula on a napkin. What Bertram Magnus thought was a lucky guess was actually a warning that would expose a multi-million-dollar betrayal. You think you know genius? Wait until you meet Bertha. This is the story of the equation that broke Wall Street. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside Louis' Corner, a diner that smelled perpetually of burnt bacon and floor wax, Bertha Jenkins wiped down table 4 for the 3rd time. She was 28, though the dark circles under her eyes added 5 years to the tally. Her apron, stained with the ghost of 1,000 ketchup spills, hung heavy on her slight frame. To the patrons of Louis', Bertha was furniture. She was the mechanism by which coffee arrived and dirty plates departed. They didn't see the way her fingers tapped out rhythms against her tray, Fibonacci sequences to calm her anxiety. They didn't see the heavily annotated copy of the Journal of Computational Finance tucked behind the soda fountain, hidden under a stack of napkins. Tonight, the diner was unusually tense. The storm outside had grounded flights at O'Hare, forcing a caliber of clientele into Louis' that usually dined behind velvet ropes. At the large booth in the back, sitting on cracked red vinyl, was a man who looked like he cost more than the building, Bertram Magnus. Even Bertha, who avoided the news to keep her blood pressure down, knew him. He was the CEO of Magnus Hale, a hedge fund that moved markets just by sneezing. He was 45, wearing a charcoal suit that refused to wrinkle, and he was currently screaming into a cell phone while 2 terrified associates, men in their late 20s named Brad and Colin, tapped furiously on laptops. "I don't care what the volatility index says," Bertram roared, slamming a platinum credit card onto the table. "The merger with Kincaid Industries happens at 8 a.m. tomorrow. If that valuation is off by even a decimal point, we trigger a regulatory audit. Find the variance. Now." Bertha approached cautiously, holding the coffee pot like a shield. "Refill?" she whispered. Bertram didn't even look up. He waved his hand dismissively, a gesture used for shooing away flies. "Just leave the pot, and get us more water. We're working." Brad, the younger associate with sweat beading on his upper lip, looked up at Bertha with a sneer. "And try to be quiet? We're dealing with numbers you couldn't count to in a lifetime." Bertha felt the familiar sting of humiliation, hot and sharp, but she swallowed it. She had practiced this swallow for 3 years, ever since her father got sick, ever since MIT, ever since she disappeared from the world. "Of course," she said softly. As she poured the water, her eyes inadvertently drifted to the screen of Brad's laptop. It was open to a complex spreadsheet running a Monte Carlo simulation. Rows of data cascaded down the screen. Asset valuations, risk coefficients, liquidity ratios. Bertha froze. The coffee pot hovered in mid-air. It was subtle. So subtle that even the proprietary software hadn't flagged it yet. But to Bertha, who saw numbers as shapes and colors, it screamed like a siren. The decay rate on the bond yield projection. It was static. "Hey," Bertha said, the word slipping out before she could stop it. The table went silent. Bertram Magnus slowly turned his head, his eyes icy blue and terrifyingly sharp. "Excuse me," Bertram said, his voice dangerously low. The simulation," Bertha stammered, pulling the pot back. "On the screen, the decay rate for the Kincaid bonds. It's set to a linear constant. But if the merger happens pre-market open, the liquidity crunch makes the decay exponential, not linear." Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Brad let out a short, incredulous laugh. Excuse me? Did the waitress just try to correct our algorithm? Bertha clutched the tray. I saw the variable. If you run it linear, you're overvaluing the asset by about 12%. You'll be underwater by noon. Bertram stared at her. For a second, he looked genuinely confused, as if his toaster had just started reciting Shakespeare. Then the arrogance returned, harder than before. Young lady, Bertram said, leaning forward. This is a proprietary model developed by 3 PhDs from Stanford. Do you know what a PhD is? It's a degree people get when they don't work in diners. I know what it is, Bertha said, her voice trembling but her chin lifting slightly. Then go get me a slice of cherry pie and stop pretending you understand stochastic calculus because you saw a movie once, Bertram snapped. He turned back to Brad. Run it again. Ignore the noise. Bertha turned on her heel, her face burning. She walked back to the counter, her hands shaking. Let it go, Bertha, Louis, the owner, grunted as he scraped grease off the grill. Don't get fired over a rich guy's ego. But she couldn't let it go. She knew that screen. She knew the math. And she knew that tomorrow morning, Bertram Magnus was going to lose $1 billion. The next morning, the storm had cleared, but the atmosphere inside Louis' was thunderous. It was 7:30 a.m. The breakfast rush was beginning, but all eyes were on the television mounted above the counter. CNBC was blaring breaking news. The ticker at the bottom of the screen was red, violently red. Magnus Hale deal collapses. Regulatory audit triggered. Stock plummets 15%. Bertha stood by the coffee machine, watching the screen. She felt a knot in her stomach. She hadn't wanted to be right. Being right meant people lost jobs. Being right meant chaos. The door to the diner burst open. It slammed against the wall with such force that the bell nearly flew off. Bertram Magnus marched in. He wasn't wearing the pristine jacket today. His tie was undone, his hair was disheveled, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept in 24 hours. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by Brad and Colin, both of whom looked like they were marching to the gallows. The diner went quiet. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Bertram walked straight to the counter, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Bertha. "You!" he barked. Louis stepped in front of Bertha, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Magnus, if there's a problem with the food—" "Get out of the way!" Bertram snarled, sidestepping the old man. He stopped 2 feet from Bertha, breathing hard. "How did you know?" Bertha hugged her order pad to her chest. "I told you, the decay rate." "It wasn't just the decay rate." Bertram slammed his hand on the counter, making the sugar shakers jump. "We ran the audit this morning after the opening bell massacre. The algorithm was flawed exactly where you looked. 12%. We lost $400 million in liquidity in 10 minutes. How did a waitress in a roadside grease trap eyeball a 12% variance in a scrolling spreadsheet?" "I didn't eyeball it," Bertha said quietly. "I calculated it." "In your head," Brad scoffed from behind Bertram, though his voice lacked its previous bite. "That's impossible. That's a multivariate equation. It's not impossible if you simplify the risk parameter to a log function," Bertha said, her voice gaining strength. She grabbed a napkin from the dispenser and a pen from her apron. She slapped the napkin on the counter. "Look," she said. She wrote quickly, the pen tearing slightly into the cheap paper. "This is your base model," she said, pointing to the black skulls variation. She scribbled a second line, adding a Poisson counterterm. "You missed the jump," Bertha said, looking Bertram in the eye. "You treated a cliff like a slope. That's why you crashed." Bertram stared at the napkin. He stared at the math. It was messy, written in blue ballpoint on recycled paper. But the logic was flawless. It was elegant. It was better than what his quants had given him. He looked up at her, really seeing her for the first time. He saw the intelligence burning behind the exhaustion. "Who are you?" Bertram whispered. "Just a waitress," Bertha said, turning back to the coffee machine. "Who needs to get back to work before she gets fired?" "You're not working here anymore," Bertram said. Bertha froze. "Excuse me?" "I'm buying your shift," Bertram said. He pulled out a checkbook. "I'm buying your day. I'm buying your week. How much do you make in a year? 40,000? 50? He scribbled a check and slid it across the counter. It was for $100,000. "Come with me," Bertram commanded. "Now." "I can't just leave," Bertha protested, looking at Louis. Louis looked at the check, then at Bertha. "Kid, if you don't go with him, I'll fire you myself. Go." Bertha looked at the check. It was more money than she had seen since her father's surgery bills wiped them out. She looked at Bertram Magnus, a man drowning, reaching out for a lifeline. She untied her apron. The Magnus Hale headquarters was a fortress of glass and steel in the financial district. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent, save for the hum of machinery. Bertha stood in her diner uniform, black slacks and a white polo, surrounded by men in $5,000 suits. When the doors opened, the chaos was palpable. Phones were ringing off the hook. Analysts were running down hallways. It smelled of fear and stale espresso. Bertram led her straight into the war room. A massive conference table was covered in papers, laptops, and half-eaten bagels. A dozen people sat around it, looking defeated. "Listen up," Bertram announced. The room quieted. "This is Bertha. She's going to fix the Kincaid model." A woman at the far end of the table stood up. She was sharp-featured, elegant, and radiated hostility. This was Jessica Thorne, the CFO of Magnus Hale. "Bertram, have you lost your mind?" Jessica asked, her voice smooth but venomous. "You brought the waitress from Louis'? I saw her serving coffee yesterday. This is a regulatory crisis, not a catering emergency." "She found the variance, Jessica," Bertram said, throwing the napkin onto the polished mahogany table. "While your team was sleeping at the wheel, she calculated the jump diffusion in her head." Jessica picked up the napkin, handling it like it was radioactive waste. She glanced at the equations. Her eyes narrowed. "So she memorized a formula from a textbook," Jessica scoffed. "That doesn't mean she understands the architecture of this deal. Bertram, we have the SEC breathing down our necks. We need lawyers, not parlor tricks." "I didn't memorize it," Bertha spoke up. Her voice was small in the large room, but it carried. "I derived it." Jessica turned her gaze on Bertha. It was a predator looking at prey. "Deriving it requires knowing the internal debt structure of Kincaid Industries. That information is in a sealed due diligence report. Unless you hacked our server, you're guessing." "I didn't hack anything," Bertha said, stepping forward. She walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picking up a black marker. "I read the public filings. Kincaid delayed their Q3 earnings report by 4 days last year. Companies only do that when they're restructuring debt or hiding a liability. I assumed a liability of roughly 5% of their market cap. If you plug that into the volatility index..." She began to write on the board. The squeak of the marker was the only sound in the room. She expanded the equation, factoring in the hidden liability. "The numbers align exactly with your crash this morning," Bertha finished, capping the marker. The room was dead silent. The analysts were staring at the board with open mouths. Brad, the associate from the diner, looked at his laptop. "Sir, if we run the simulation with her parameters, the projection matches the current market price to the penny. She's right. We're not just undervalued. We're exposed." Bertram looked at Jessica. "We're exposed? How?" Bertha answered before Jessica could. Because the only way the variance is this specific, she pointed to a variable on the board, is if someone was shorting the stock from the inside. The formula doesn't just show a mistake, Mr. Magnus, it shows a leak. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bertram's face went pale. A leak? Mathematical anomaly, Bertha said, her confidence growing as she stood on the firm ground of mathematics. The crash happened too fast. The volume of sell orders hit milliseconds before the news wire broke. Someone knew the algorithm was flawed and bet against it. Someone wanted this deal to fail. Bertram turned slowly to look at the room. His eyes were dangerous. Who had access to the final Kincaid diligence report? Jessica Thorne remained perfectly still. Only the senior partners and the external auditors. And you, Bertram said. Are you accusing me? Jessica asked, a cold smile touching her lips. Based on the scribblings of a diner girl. I'm not accusing anyone, Bertha said. I'm just reading the numbers. The numbers don't lie. But people do. Bertram looked at Bertha. Can you prove it? Can you prove someone bet against us using our own data? If you give me access to the trade logs and the server timestamps, Bertha said. Yes, I can trace the origin of the short. Give her a terminal, Bertram ordered. Bertram, this is insane, Jessica protested. You cannot give a civilian access to our proprietary data, the compliance violations alone. I don't care about compliance, Bertram roared. I lost $500 million today. Brad, give her your seat. Bertha, sit down. Bertha sat in the ergonomic leather chair. It felt foreign compared to the hard plastic of the diner booth. She placed her hands on the keyboard. It had been years, but the muscle memory was there. She typed in a command line, the screen filled with data. Bertha's eyes darted across the lines. She was hunting. There, she pointed. A shell company. Chimera Holdings. They placed a massive put option on Magnus Hale stock at 7:58 a.m. 2 minutes before the market opened. They leveraged the exact variance I found. Who owns Chimera Holdings? Bertram demanded. Bertha typed furiously. It's routed through the Caymans, bouncing through a server in Zurich. She bit her lip. I need to bypass the firewall. Do it, Bertram said. Bertha's fingers flew. She wasn't just a math whiz. She was a former MIT standout who had lost her scholarship because she spent too much time in the grey areas of the code. Got it, she whispered. The IP address for the trade order. It didn't come from Zurich. She turned the screen toward Bertram. It came from inside this building. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Bertram looked at the IP address. Then he looked up, his eyes locking onto a man sitting quietly in the corner. Not Jessica. It was Colin, the other associate from the diner. The quiet one. Colin, Bertram said, his voice trembling with rage. Colin stood up slowly. His face was pale, but his expression was calm. She's good, Colin said, nodding at Bertha. She's really good. But she missed one thing. What's that? Bertha asked. I didn't execute the trade, Colin said, pulling a small remote from his pocket. I just wrote the code, and I just triggered the failsafe. Suddenly, the lights in the building flickered and died. The computer screens went black. The electronic locks on the conference room doors engaged with a loud thud. They were trapped. The server is wiping itself, Colin said in the darkness. And in 10 minutes, there won't be any proof that Magnus Hale ever existed. Just a bankrupt shell. Bertram lunged for Colin, but the room was pitch black. Panic erupted. The formula! Bertha shouted over the noise. He's using a recursive loop to delete the data. I can stop it, but I need a terminal that works. They're all dead, Brad screamed. Not all of them, Bertha said, her mind racing. She remembered seeing something in Bertram's office on the way in. An old, vintage terminal. A purely analog connection to the main frame, kept as a collector's piece. "Bertram, the operational terminal in your office. Is it hardwired?" "Yes," Bertram shouted from the dark. "But the doors are locked." Bertha felt for the table, grabbing the heavy glass pitcher of water. "Then we make our own door." The conference room was a tomb of suffocating darkness, broken only by the panicked shouts of the executives and the faint, erratic blue glow of dying smartphone screens. The air was already growing stuffy as the ventilation system died along with the servers. "Nobody move!" Bertram's voice bellowed, trying to assert order over the chaos. "Brad, use your phone light. Find the door handle. See if there's a manual override." A thin beam of light cut through the blackness, shaking violently in Brad's grip. He stumbled to the heavy glass double doors. "It's dead-bolted electronically. Mag locks. We need power to disengage them." "We don't have power," Bertha said, her voice tight. She gripped the heavy glass water pitcher with both hands, the condensation cold against her sweating palms. The weight of it was comforting. It was real, solid, unlike the digital ghosts erasing themselves on the servers downstairs. "Colin," Bertram growled into the dark. "Turn it off. Now." "I told you I can't." Colin's voice floated from the corner, eerily calm. "It's a runaway process. It doesn't stop until it hits 0. You have about 8 minutes left before Magnus Hale is just a memory." "Where is he?" Bertram snarled, moving toward the voice. "Bertram, stop!" Bertha yelled. "We don't have time for a fistfight. The terminal in your office. You said it was hardwired. Does it bypass the main network switch?" Bertram paused. Yes. It was installed 20 years ago, as a redundancy. A direct fiber line to the mainframe core. It's analog. It shouldn't be affected by Colin's digital kill switch. "Then we have to get to it," Bertha said. She hefted the pitcher. "Move away from the door." "Are you crazy?" Jessica Thorne's shrill voice cried out from the darkness. "That's ballistic architectural glass. You can't break it with a water pitcher." "Watch me," Bertha grunted. She didn't swing at the center of the door. That was the strongest point. She remembered a physics lecture from her freshman year about stress points in tempered materials. She aimed low, toward the bottom hinge corner, where the glass met the steel frame. She swung with everything she had. Clang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The pitcher bounced off, jarring Bertha's shoulders to the bone. The glass didn't even scratch. "It's useless," Brad wailed, his flashlight beam dancing wildly on the ceiling. "Again!" Bertram shouted, moving to Bertha's side, his hand finding her shoulder in the dark to steady her. "Hit it again, Bertha!" She swung again. Clang! Nothing. Panic clawed at her throat. 8 minutes. 7 now. 7 minutes until the proof that she was right, and the proof of who destroyed them, vanished forever. She thought about Louis's diner, the smell of stale coffee, the ache in her feet, the humiliation of men like Brad treating her like furniture. "No," she whispered. "Not today." She channeled every ounce of rage, frustration, and desperate intelligence she possessed into a third swing. She didn't just hit the glass. She tried to swing through it. Crack! A sound like a gunshot echoed through the room. A spiderweb of fractures exploded from the bottom corner of the door. "It's compromised!" Bertram yelled. "Everyone back!" He grabbed the pitcher from Bertha's trembling hands. He didn't swing it. He hurled it, a two-handed chest pass, straight into the center of the spiderweb. The door exploded outward in a shower of heavy safety granules that rained down onto the hallway carpet like diamonds. The cool air of the corridor rushed in. "Go!" Bertram pushed Bertha through the shattered frame. "Brad, stay here. Don't let Colin move a muscle. If he tries to leave, tackle him." "But I'm an analyst," Brad squeaked. "Today you're security." Bertram and Bertha sprinted down the darkened 40th floor hallway. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the corridor in an eerie, pulsing red glow. It felt less like an office building and more like the inside of a sinking submarine. They burst into Bertram's massive corner office. It was untouched by the chaos, a silent sanctuary of mahogany and leather overlooking the city. In the corner, sitting on a dedicated pedestal like a museum piece, was the vintage terminal. It was a bulky grey beast with a curved green monochrome screen, humming quietly on its own dedicated UPS battery backup. "Please tell me you remember DOS commands," Bertram said, pulling the keyboard tray out. Bertha sat down, her fingers hovering over the chunky mechanical keys. "It's not DOS. It's worse. It's a custom Unix kernel from the late 90s. The green cursor blinked at her. A single demanding rectangle. Bertha took a deep breath. The modern world of slick interfaces and touchscreens melted away. This was raw computing. This was the metal. She typed, "Root, system, override, password required." "Bertram, the root password for the legacy system," Bertha cried. "I don't know." Bertram ran a hand through his hair, frantic. "My predecessor set this up. It hasn't been used in a decade. Think, a date, a name, the founder's dog?" Bertram stared at the blinking cursor. "Try Magnus Prime." Bertha typed it. "Access denied. Try the founding date, 198504-2. Bertha typed it. "Access denied. One attempt remaining before system lockout. If this locks us out, we're dead," Bertha whispered. The sweat was dripping off her nose onto the keyboard. "Bertram," she said, turning to him. "Who built this company? Really built it? Before the algorithms and the quants?" Bertram looked out the window at the city below. "My grandfather, Marcus Magnus. He was a bootlegger during Prohibition before he went legitimate." Bertha's eyes widened. A bootlegger. They hated paper trails. They used ciphers. She looked at the keyboard. What was his favorite drink? Bertram looked confused. "Gin." "Why?" "Gin," Bertha whispered. She looked at the numerical keypad. If you traced the letters GIN on a standard telephone pad, what numbers did you get? 446. It was a long shot. A ridiculous, cinematic long shot. But it was the kind of human element a machine like Colin would never consider. She typed, 446. She hit enter. The screen paused. A long, agonizing second passed. Root access granted. "Yes!" Bertram roared. Bertha didn't celebrate. She dove into the code. She bypassed the graphical interface entirely, pulling up the raw command stream of the mainframe. Lines of green text scrolled by so fast they blurred. "I see it," Bertha said, her voice monotone, entirely focused. "It's a recursive deletion script. Simple, nasty. It's eating the databases alphabetically. It just finished Client Records AG. "Stop it," Bertram commanded. "I can't just stop it. It'll trigger a failsafe and dump the RAM. I have to trap it." Bertha's fingers flew across the loud, clacking keys. She was writing code on the fly, building a digital cage around Colin's script. She created a virtual sandbox, a fake partition of the drive, and rerouted the deletion script into it. Rerouting process ID 9999422. The scrolling text slowed down. Process trapped. Main database integrity. 14%. "We lost 86%? Bertram groaned, leaning against the desk. "No," Bertha corrected, hitting one final key. "The deletion script thinks it ate 86%. I rerouted it before it touched the core files. We saved the data. All of it." As if on cue, the overhead lights in the office flickered and buzzed back to life. The red emergency glow was replaced by harsh fluorescence. The hum of the building's HVAC system returned. Bertram stared at Bertha. She was disheveled, covered in glass dust, sweating, and wearing a cheap diner polo, and she was the most formidable person he had ever met. "You did it," Bertram breathed. "We're not done." Bertha stood up, her legs shaking slightly. She pointed at the green screen. "The script is stopped. Now we can see where it came from, and who paid for it." The atmosphere in the conference room had shifted from panic to a sickly dread. The lights were back on, revealing the shattered glass door and the stunned faces of the executives. Colin was sitting in a chair, flanked by 2 large security guards Bertram had summoned the moment the phones came back online. He wasn't smug anymore. He looked small, defeated, staring at his expensive Italian loafers. Jessica Thorne stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly, watching the city below. Bertram and Bertha walked back in. Bertha carried a sheaf of dot matrix printer paper, warm from the vintage printer in Bertram's office. It contained the raw logs of the morning's catastrophe. Bertram tossed the papers onto the table. They landed with a heavy thud. "It's over, Colin," Bertram said coldly. "We saved the server. We have the trade logs. We have the IP addresses. And we have the wire transfers that hit your offshore account 10 minutes after you executed the crash code." Colin didn't look up. "I want a lawyer." "You'll need a dozen," Bertram said. $25 million. That's the price of your soul, apparently. That's what was transferred into your account in the Caymans. Bertram leaned over the table, getting inches from Colin's face. "Who paid you? Chimera Holdings is a shell. Who is behind the shell? Give me a name, and maybe you see sunlight again before you're 70. Colin swallowed hard. He glanced quickly, nervously toward the window, toward Jessica. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second. But Bertha caught it. She remembered the diner, how Brad had been loud and obnoxious, but Colin had just been quietly tapping away. The quiet ones were always the observers, and Colin was observing Jessica now for a cue. Bertha looked at Jessica Thorne. The CFO hadn't moved. She was perfectly poised, her silk blouse impeccable, her posture rigid. "Jessica," Bertha said. Jessica turned slowly. "Yes. The waitress has something to add? You got lucky with an old computer. Don't push it." "It wasn't luck," Bertha said, walking around the table, approaching the formidable CFO. "It was math. It's always math." Bertha laid a single page from the dot matrix printout on the table in front of Jessica. "When I traced the funding for Chimera Holdings, I found something interesting," Bertha said, her voice steady. "The initial seed money didn't come from a competitor. It didn't come from outside the country. It came from a diversified trust fund set up 20 years ago." Jessica glanced down at the paper. Her expression didn't flicker. "So? Many investors use trusts." "Yes, they do," Bertha agreed. "But this trust had a very specific disbursement pattern. Every month, for the last 5 years, it sent small payments to a high-end nursing facility in upstate New York, the Whispering Pines Memory Care Unit." Bertha paused, letting the silence stretch. "I looked up who was staying there. A woman named Beatrice Thorne. Your mother." The color drained from Jessica's face so fast it looked painful. Her perfect facade cracked. Bertram looked from Bertha to Jessica, horrified realization dawning on his face. "Jessica? You?" Jessica's lips trembled, then pressed into a hard line. She dropped the pretense. She didn't scream. She laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You were always too sentimental, Bertram," Jessica spat, turning on him. "Magnus Hale was stagnating. You were obsessed with legacy, while the market was moving toward pure algorithmic aggression. You missed the Kincaid variable because you were too busy shaking hands and taking pictures for Forbes." "You tried to destroy my company," Bertram whispered, stunned by the proximity of the betrayal. "We've worked together for 15 years. I tried to save it from your incompetence. Jessica stepped forward, her eyes blazing. The plan was perfect. Crash the stock, force a liquidity crisis, trigger the bylaws that allow the board to remove the CEO for negligence. I would have stepped in, bought back the stock at rock bottom using the Chimera funds, and rebuilt the company the right way. The efficient way. She pointed a shaking finger at Bertha. If it wasn't for this gutter trash savant spilling coffee and sticking her nose where it didn't belong, I would be sitting in your chair tomorrow morning. Bertram looked at Jessica as if he were seeing a monster wearing a friend's skin. You didn't just bet against us. You manipulated data. You bribed an employee to commit corporate sabotage. That's prison, Jessica. Federal prison. Jessica straightened her jacket. My lawyers will tie this up for years. You have printouts from a 20-year-old computer. It's circumstantial. It was, Bertha interjected quietly, until 5 minutes ago. Bertha held up her own cracked smartphone. The screen was recording. When we came back in, Bertha said, I turned on the voice memo app. You just confessed to everything. The motive, the method, the intent. It's all here. Jessica stared at the phone. The blood rushing back into her face turned it a mottled crimson. For a moment, she looked like she might lunge across the table at Bertha. Security, Bertram barked. The two guards who were watching Colin stepped forward. Escort Ms. Thorne to her office. She is to touch nothing. Then call the FBI. As the guards led a furious, silent Jessica away, the room seemed to exhale. The tension broke. Brad collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Bertram walked over to the window where Jessica had stood. He looked out at the city, a man who had just survived a firing squad he didn't know was assembled. He turned to Bertha. She was standing by the table, looking utterly out of place in the boardroom. Yet she was the only reason the room still mattered. Bertha, Bertram said, his voice thick with emotion. You owe me for the day, Bertha said, trying to keep her voice light, though she felt like she might faint from exhaustion. And a new apron. I think I left mine in the stairwell. Bertram managed a weak smile. He picked up the check he had written her in the diner that morning. The one for $100,000, which was still sitting on the table where he'd thrown it hours ago. He tore it up. Bertha's heart sank a little. She was going to need that money to pay Louis back for walking out during the rush. Then Bertram pulled out his checkbook again. He wrote quickly, ripped the check out, and handed it to her. Bertha looked at it. It wasn't for $100,000. It was a payroll check. It was made out to Bertha Jenkins. The memo line read, Chief Quantitative Strategist, signing bonus. The amount was $500,000. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild this place, Bertram said, meeting her eyes with profound respect. I need someone who sees the cliffs before we drive off them. Someone who knows the math better than the machines. Will you stay? Bertha looked at the check. It was freedom. It was her father's medical debts paid off. It was her life back. She looked at the complex equations still scrawled on the whiteboard, the language she spoke better than any other. She looked at Bertram, no longer the arrogant titan, but a man asking for help. I'll need coffee, Bertha said, and not the swill from the break room machine. Bertram laughed, a genuine, relieved sound. Deal, I know a great diner. The honeymoon phase at Magnus Hale lasted exactly 48 hours. By Monday morning, the story had leaked. The New York Post ran with the headline, Will Hunting in Heels, Billionaire Hires Diner Waitress to Run Quants. The Wall Street Journal was more subdued, but equally skeptical. Magnus Hale's unorthodox pivot, desperation or innovation. Bertha Jenkins walked onto the trading floor at 6:30 a.m., clutching a thermos of coffee she had made at home. She wasn't wearing her apron anymore. She was wearing a navy blue blazer she'd bought at an outlet mall on Sunday, and stiff new heels that were already blistering her heels. The trading floor, a cavernous space filled with 400 people and 3,000 monitors, went silent as she passed. It wasn't a respectful silence. It was the silence of a pack of wolves evaluating a limping deer. Bertram Magnus had given her an office next to his, but Bertha knew she couldn't hide in a glass box. If she was going to be the chief quantitative strategist, she had to earn the floor. She found her desk at the center of the quant pit, the area reserved for the math PhDs and algorithmic traders. Sitting across from her was Preston Caldwell. Preston was the head of derivatives. He was 35, had perfect teeth, a degree from Wharton, and a pedigree that went back to the Mayflower. He looked at Bertha as if she were a health code violation. "So," Preston said, not bothering to lower his voice. "The mascot has arrived? Did you bring the menu? I'm feeling like Eggs Benedict." A ripple of laughter went through the pod. Bertha set her thermos down. She felt the familiar heat rising in her cheeks, the same shame she felt when customers tipped her a quarter on a $50 bill. But she remembered the check Bertram had given her. She remembered the math. "I didn't bring a menu, Preston," Bertha said, her voice steady. "But I did look at your overnight positions on the Nikkei index. You're hedging against a yen fluctuation that stabilized 3 hours ago. You're bleeding basis points, about $10,000 a minute by my count." The laughter died instantly. Preston turned to his screen. He tapped a few keys. His face tightened. She was right. He had missed the stabilization curve because he was too busy making jokes. "Beginner's luck," Preston muttered, closing the window. "Don't get comfortable, Jenkins. Bertram might be having a midlife crisis, but the rest of us actually work for a living. You're a PR stunt, and when the cameras leave, you'll be back to pouring refills." "Gentlemen," a voice boomed from the overhead speakers. It was Bertram. "Morning briefing in 5 minutes. Bertha, you're leading it." The briefing room was packed. Every eye was on Bertha. She stood at the front, feeling small. Bertram gave her an encouraging nod from the side. "Okay," Bertha started, her voice cracking slightly before she cleared her throat. "The market is reacting to the Magnus Hale news. Volatility is up, but the real issue is the tech sector in Europe. I've been running a regression analysis on the semiconductor supply chain." "Excuse me," Preston interrupted, raising a hand lazily. "We use the standard volatility index for European tech. Why are we listening to a regression analysis from someone who doesn't even have a Bloomberg terminal login yet?" "Because the standard index is wrong," Bertha said, gaining ground. "It doesn't account for the cobalt shortage in the Congo. My formula does." "Your formula?" Preston scoffed. "The magic napkin. Look, sweetie, this is the big leagues. We don't do back-of-the-envelope math here. We use validated models." "Preston, sit down," Bertram warned. "No, Bertram, I won't." Preston stood up. "This is ridiculous. We're the laughing stock of the street. Clients are calling me, asking if their portfolio is being managed by the kitchen staff. I move $3 billion a day. I'm not taking orders from a dropout." "Then you can leave," Bertha said. The room gasped. Bertha looked Preston in the eye. "If you don't trust the math, you shouldn't be here. The math says the semiconductor sector crashes at 10 a.m. If I'm wrong, I quit. Today. I walk out and you never see me again." She paused, looking around the room. "But if I'm right, you give me your seat on the risk committee." Preston laughed. "Deal. 10 a.m. If the sector is stable, you're gone, and I'll personally drive you back to the diner." The next 2 hours were agony. The trading floor watched the clock. 9:05 a.m. passed. The sector was up. 9:30 a.m. Still up. Preston walked by Bertha's desk, humming. "Better call Louis. Ask if he kept your apron." Bertha stared at her screen. The variables were all there. The pressure was building. It had to break. 9:58 a.m. "Still green," Preston shouted across the floor. "Pack your bags, Cinderella." 9:59 a.m. Suddenly, a breaking news alert flashed on the massive central screen. Cobalt mines in Congo declare force majeure due to flooding. Supply chain halted. The room went deadly silent. 10:00 a.m. The ticker for the semiconductor sector turned from green to red, then deeper red. It plummeted. A vertical drop. "Sell!" someone screamed. "Short it! Short everything!" The floor erupted into chaos. Phones rang. Traders screamed. But amidst the panic, Magnus Hale was calm. Because Bertha had already positioned them. They weren't losing money. They were making a fortune on the drop. Bertha sat quietly at her desk, typing. Preston stood frozen. His face was the color of ash. He looked at the news, then at the clock, then at Bertha. Bertha swiveled her chair around to face him. "I take my coffee black, Preston," she said, "and I believe the Risk Committee meets on Tuesdays." Bertram watched from his glass office, a smile spreading across his face. She wasn't just a savant. She was a shark. But the victory was short-lived. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived with a package for Bertha. It wasn't marked with a return address. She opened it at her desk. Inside was a single item, a dirty, crumpled napkin. On it was written a formula. Her formula. The one she had written for Bertram that first night. But underneath it, in red ink, someone had written, "You missed a variable." Bertha felt a chill run down her spine. She turned the napkin over. On the back was a sequence of numbers, a date, and a location. Tomorrow. Midnight. The docks. Warehouse 4B. She looked up. Across the trading floor, the hustle continued, but she felt eyes on her, not the jealous eyes of Preston. Something colder. Jessica Thorne was in police custody. Colin was in jail. Who sent this? She ran to Bertram's office. "Bertram, look at this." Bertram examined the napkin. "It's a prank. Probably Preston trying to scare you." "No." Bertha shook her head. "Look at the derivative notation in the corner. Preston doesn't write his sigmas like that. Only one person I knew wrote them like that." "Who?" "My father," Bertha whispered. Bertram frowned. "I thought you said your father died. That's why you left MIT. The medical bills." "He is dead," Bertha said, her voice trembling. "I buried him 3 years ago. That's why this is impossible." Bertha looked at the napkin again. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was the jagged, frantic scrawl of a genius losing his mind. "Someone is playing a game," Bertha said, her eyes hardening. "And they know everything about me." Against Bertram's strict orders and the advice of the company's head of security, Bertha did not go home that night. She stayed in the office, digging. If the handwriting belonged to her father, Robert Jenkins, then everything she knew about his death was a lie. Robert had been a theoretical mathematician, a man who saw patterns in chaotic systems. He had died of a degenerative neurological condition. He had lost his mind before he lost his life. Bertha pulled up her father's old medical records. She used the Magnus Hale resources to bypass the hospital's privacy firewall. She needed to see the death certificate again. There it was. Cardiac arrest, time of death, 4:12 a.m. But then she noticed something. The attending physician's signature. Dr. A. Chimera. Bertha stopped breathing. Chimera. The same name as the shell company Jessica Thorne had used to short the stock. It wasn't just greed, Bertha whispered to the empty office. It's a loop. She grabbed her coat. She couldn't wait for the meeting on the docks tomorrow. She needed answers now. She looked up the address of the doctor listed on the death certificate. It led to a brownstone in the Upper East Side. She hailed a cab. The city was raining again, just like the night she met Bertram. When she arrived at the brownstone, it was dark. She rang the buzzer. No answer. She tried the door. It was unlocked. Bertha pushed it open. "Hello?" The house was empty, stripped bare, no furniture, no pictures, just dust. She walked into the living room. In the center of the floor, sitting on a solitary wooden chair, was a laptop. It was open. The screen was glowing blue. Bertha approached it slowly. On the screen was a live video feed. It was a feed of Louie's Corner, her old diner. The diner was closed for the night, but inside, tied to a chair in the middle of the floor, was Louie. A voice crackled from the laptop speakers. It was digitized, distorted. "Hello, Bertha. You solve equations very quickly. Let's see how you handle a time limit." "Who are you?" Bertha screamed at the screen. "Where is Louie?" "Louie is fine, for now, but the gas line in the diner has been severed, and the pilot light on the grill is set to ignite in exactly 20 minutes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you interfered. You fixed the Magnus-Hale equation. You saved the company. You ruined a plan that has been in motion for a decade. Jessica was a blunt instrument. I am the scalpel." "My father," Bertha said. "Why do you have his handwriting?" The voice paused. Robert was a brilliant man. He understood that the market isn't about money. It's about entropy, chaos. He built a model to predict the end of the global economy. I am simply executing it. You have 20 minutes, Bertha. You can save the old man, or you can save the algorithm. But you can't do both. What do you mean? On this laptop is the source code for the virus currently infecting Magnus-Hale's global servers. Yes, we planted a second one. It activates in 20 minutes. It will wipe out not just the company, but the pension funds of 3 million people. Or you can close the laptop, run to the diner, and save your friend. The choice was impossible. A trolley problem brought to life. Save the man who was like a father to her, or save the financial lives of millions of strangers. Bertha looked at the screen. Louie looked terrified. She looked at the code scrolling on the side. It was complex, incredibly complex. It used the same recursive logic her father had taught her when she was a child. Wait. She leaned closer. The code had a rhythm, a syntax. 15 minutes, Bertha. Bertha didn't run. She sat down at the chair. You're lying, Bertha said into the microphone. Excuse me? You're lying. This isn't a choice. It's a test. Bertha typed furiously on the laptop. My father didn't believe in entropy. He believed in symmetry. For every action, a reaction. If this code is based on his work, there's a back door. There is no back door. There is always a back door, Bertha shouted, because he wrote it for me. He knew one day I'd find it. She wasn't looking for a stop command. She was looking for a signature. Her father used to leave hidden messages in his work, mathematical poetry. She found it, line 4042, a string of binary that translated to Bertha. She highlighted it. She deleted it. The screen flashed red. System purge initiated. What did you do? The voice sounded panicked now. The distortion wavered, revealing a human tone underneath. A distinct, rasping, elderly voice. I didn't stop the virus, Bertha said, standing up. I reversed the polarity. It's not attacking Magnus-Hale anymore. It's tracing the connection back to you. The laptop screen flickered. The video feed of the diner cut out. And as for Louie, Bertha said, pulling out her phone. I sent a text to Bertram 10 minutes ago. He has a private security detail parked outside the diner, 24/7 since the news broke. They disconnected the gas line 5 minutes ago. Silence from the laptop. Then a dark chuckle. Very good. Very good indeed. You are your father's daughter. Who are you? Bertha demanded. You'll find out soon enough. Come to the Global Financial Summit in Zurich next week. Bring your tuxedo, Bertha. The game has just begun. The connection died. The laptop fried itself, smoke rising from the keyboard. Bertha stood alone in the empty house. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. She walked out into the rain. A black town car pulled up. The window rolled down. It was Bertram. I got your text, Bertram said, looking pale. Louis is safe. My guys got him out. He's complaining about the roughness, but he's alive. Bertha! What is going on? Bertha got into the car. She looked at Bertram. We have to go to Zurich, she said. Zurich? The summit? That's a shark tank. I know, Bertha said. She pulled the crumpled napkin from her pocket, the one with her father's handwriting. But the shark is waiting for us, and I think I know who it is. Who? Bertha looked out the window at the passing city lights. The man who taught my father everything he knew. The man who supposedly died in 1999. Your grandfather's partner, Silas Vane. Bertram looked at her like she was insane. Silas Vane? The Oracle of Omaha's only rival. He's been dead for 20 years. So is my father, supposedly, Bertha said. But dead men are writing code, Bertram, and they're trying to crash the world. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The waitress was gone. The strategist was here. Drive, Bertha said. We have a plane to catch. And that is where we leave Bertha and Bertram, speeding through the rain toward a private jet, ready to face a ghost from the past. Bertha went from an invisible waitress wiping tables to the only person capable of stopping a global financial collapse. But the mastermind, Silas Vane, is still waiting in the shadows. The battle for the global economy is heading to Zurich, and the stakes have never been higher. Do you think Bertha has what it takes to outsmart a man who has been dead for 20 years? And is there more to her father's involvement than she realizes? If you want to see the showdown in Zurich and find out how this high-stakes chess game ends, smash that like button right now. If we get enough likes, I will drop part 2 immediately. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you're the first to know when the sequel lands. Share this video with a friend who loves a genius underdog story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Zurich.